Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Salim Afshar, Chief Medical and Innovation Officer at Reveal HealthTech and host of our webinar series, Reveal AI in Healthcare. We are excited to bring to you another in our series of interviews with top leaders and thinkers in healthcare IT and innovation. Today's guest is a good friend and known to many in the world of healthcare innovation and technology. She's a professional speaker and an author of a new book called How AI Can Democratize Healthcare. Welcome, Robin.
I'm so excited to talk to you. We go back over a decade. Can you believe it?
Yeah, it's just not age ourselves, but yes.
We're still 29, obviously.
Yeah. So, yes, we've known each other since, over a decade, and we've been talking about the future of healthcare for well over a decade. And I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and also what inspired you to write this book now regarding how AI can democratize healthcare.
Sure. So I'm an early stage entrepreneur, and I've worked across early stage small molecules found through AI for drug discovery, to cryopreservation, to sleep apnea, TMS for depression, and a number of cool companies like VR and radiology. But the reason I decided to become an entrepreneur is because as a teenager, I was misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and it ended up resulting in 43 hospitalizations, 6 major surgeries, and 3 organs removed. Now, by the time I was 26, this was 7 years after I had my entire large intestine surgically removed, a total colectomy with J pouch. My doctors were telling me I was cured, but I wasn't, and I was in extreme pain. So over a period of time, they just kept upping my opiate dose until eventually I was on 80 milligrams a day of methadone. Now, that's an absolutely gigantic dose of medication, and I hated it. And so I went back into my doctor, and I was like, I need off of this. And she said, okay, well, next step could be to surgically implant a morphine pump into your spine. I was 26. I was essentially a shut-in. I could not function on a daily basis. And what I was hearing is that they were telling me this was the rest of my life. And so I said, absolutely not. And I decided to fire my entire healthcare team. Went home that night and I dropped my own methadone dose by about 40%, went through pretty hardcore opioid withdrawals where all you can do is essentially crawl on the floor to the kitchen to get lemonade and salt because that's really all I could get down. Then after about a week, I felt better and I rebuilt my care team with doctors that worked with me as a team, right, and a colleague. I ended up getting diagnosed correctly with Crohn's, put on an IV med called Remicade, and within 24 hours of that very first dose, I went into full remission. It literally happened overnight. So that's why I do what I do. And my life goal now is to really impact positively at least 100 million patients worldwide, which is why I like to work on so many different cool diseases or solutions for horrible diseases.
It's incredible. I, as you know, I'm a doctor. I focus on head and neck conditions and rare conditions. And I call that phase the medical nomad phase, where patients are just wandering the health system, trying to find an answer, seeing specialists. It's fragmented, it's broken, and it's just prolonged suffering and delayed diagnosis. I love, so you definitely had this deep experience, right? And now you're talking about AI. So tell us about what are some of the themes of this book, and how do you think AI will transform the journey of getting a diagnosis, as well as the ongoing treatment and maintenance?
Yes, so I've been talking about AI for about 12 years now, and I did in my first book, The Patient as CEO, that came out, 9 years ago now. But this new one, How AI Can Democratize Healthcare, I wrote it now because it is accelerating dramatically, and we are already starting to see some huge benefits. And so I dive into things like vocal biomarkers, using a patient's voice as a vital sign, digital therapeutics, which means it's a companion app to either on its own or to medication and other types of interventions like therapy. Predictive analytics, right? We're seeing a lot of clinical grade devices going into the home that are recording millions of data points every day on every patient, using things like a single lead EKG and photoplasmography, which is a PPG, and that's how pulse oximeters typically work. And so being able to have those huge amounts of like medical data on patients when they're well and when they're sick means we can do a lot more in the predictive analytics, essentially, and telling a patient 3 to even 7 days before they need to actually go to an emergency room, right? And so you can ward off that type of emergency care with predictive analytics.
Wow. Well, that's really exciting. And lots of advanced technology, lots of sensors. And to some of my colleagues who are cynical, that also sounds expensive, especially in the context that healthcare technology in the past decade has really just driven the cost of healthcare. So tell me how you see the future bending towards more cost-effective and higher quality care with this.
So most of the time, it's actually cheaper to provide care in the patient's home. And so, for instance, I moved my Remicade into the home about 7 or 8 years ago at this point.
Okay.
And not only did all of my side effects went away, it used to take me about a week to recover after spending 3 or 4 hours in a really busy and noisy infusion clinic. Moving it into the home, my recovery time went down to 0 days, but the price fell dramatically. My local hospital was charging $28,000 for the medication, and I get it 8 times a year. My in-home provider, it's Option Care, they charge $2,500 over a 5-year period. That comes out to a difference in billing of $1 million. And that is just one example. You move things like dialysis into the home. Not only is it cheaper, but we're seeing patients survive 3 times longer, right? Which is equivalent to a kidney transplant. And so we're actually seeing the prices drop. But the biggest thing that's going on and really driving some of this adoption is the big payers, including Medicare. And so Medicare, United, Humana, CVS, they have all spent billions of dollars in the past 3 or 4 years, shifting care into the home, specifically around value-based healthcare. But with this shift and with all of these payers really on board with that at-home healthcare, I expect to see adoption of the medical devices and the remote patient monitoring start to go up significantly over the next 5 years.
So your prediction is 5 years from now, what percentage of care will you think will be moving that's currently in the hospital setting towards the home? 10%, 20%?
So McKinsey did a study last year, and they expect over this year and next year, $265 billion of in-clinic services are going to shift into the home, specifically around Medicare patients.
Well, that is from a quality and experience for patients, it's fantastic. But for the incumbents who have a current practice where they have a traditional model, how do you encourage them, and what do they need to do to be able to embrace this transition?
So if you're talking about, say, specialists, that's an easy one. So where you get patients referred from is going to shift. Not only are United and Humana and CVS Aetna trying to really control primary care in the value-based healthcare setting, but you're really seeing other people or other companies getting massively on board with it as well.
And what about for hospitals, right? Right now, the current financial market for hospitals is very difficult, right? Tight margins, yes. A lot of hospitals, especially community hospitals, are struggling. How could they implement kind of what we're talking about in a very practical way, right, over the next couple of years, so that they don't go belly up because of investments? As you saw, there's been several hospitals who have blamed their bankruptcies on EHR implementation. So what is the positioning, and how do you develop a unified kind of effort here?
Sure. So first of all, partner with some of the payers, partner with Amazon, which now owns One Medical. So you are the hospital that Amazon refers to. But really start thinking about providing the services yourself. And I remember I did a keynote about 4 or 5 years ago for CHIME, College of Healthcare Information Management Professionals. And I asked one of the CTOs of a hospital system there, why don't you, essentially get day nurses and you provide in-home IV medication and you provide in-home dialysis? And he said, you know what, we'd love to, but our software won't let us. Like, wait, are you kidding? It is a software problem that you can't provide care in the home. And so that has changed dramatically with the new interoperability laws. Not only that, but with companies like Epic, they were very, very closed door before the laws went into effect, and now the laws are into effect with interoperability, and they have opened up their EMR for being able to partner with companies like Current Health, Bioformus, Advantage. There are a number of platforms that provide the in-home care, aggregate the wearable tech data, aggregate the services data from the home clinic, and then integrate that into the EMR. And so this is a dramatic change, and it's only been about a year since this was even possible.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And you touched on something earlier, which was diagnosis through voice. Can you just comment a little bit about this ambient environment of data that be captured? I'd love to hear your thoughts regarding what are the most next steps for ambient kind of monitoring, and what does that look like for a patient, for those who are listening, and for doctors as well?
So two different things, and I'll talk about GPT. If I don't remember to, remind me. But the first one is thinking about the fact that we all have microphones with us at all times for things like vocal biomarkers. And so some of the really cool early stage kind of like ideas are just counting coughs. Can you imagine, right? Coughing is one of the main symptoms that drives primary care and urgent care. And yet, if you go into a doctor and they've changed your medication, and the doc says, hey, Robin, how's that cough? We changed your medication. Do you think you're coughing less? I think so, doc. Oh, well, how many times do you think you coughed yesterday? 3,207? Like, we have no idea how often we cough, right? And so having these ubiquitous microphones that are ambient listening from your iPhone or your Apple Watch or your laptop computer or your tablet means we can do things like count the number of times someone coughs. So there's a really interesting company called Hive AI, and they've partnered up with Merck, and they have put out an app that is free for everyone. The reason it's free is because they want to get back very diverse data sets, right? They don't want this to be based on just the people who can afford an expensive app. They really want to make sure that they get very, very, tons of different data from tons of different people. And they go one step further. Besides just counting the number of times someone coughs, they categorize the coughs into things like a whooping cough or a wheezing or a productive cough. Because of course, and you know this better than anyone probably, the way a cough sounds is both an indication of the problem, but also a potential treatment that would work on that. Now, that's just one of the companies working in that space. There are other ones like Cambridge Cognition. Just by using patients' voices, they are able to detect aphasia with 100% accuracy and Alzheimer's with 82% accuracy, right? But then another couple of really cool ones are Ellipsis Health as well as Sond, and they're both doing vocal biomarkers for mental health, right? Stress, anxiety, and depression. But then you look at the ambient listening in the world of GPT and generative AI, and all of a sudden, this means, especially for physicians, if it's auto-transcribing the clinic visit, auto-summarizing the clinic visit, both for the physician, but in different language for the patient, all of a sudden, the doctor doesn't have to sit there and look into a computer screen and type the entire time they're in with a patient. They can look the patient in the eyes, right? Watch the body language, interact, and really, make a good connection with the patient, while the ambient listening device is in the background, taking all the notes you could possibly need. And looking at companies like Carbon Health, they have their own EMR system. And so they immediately integrated generative AI into that. And they're seeing that it's 2.5 times more detailed than when a doctor takes the notes. And it's saving them, I think it's about 12 minutes of time per patient. That is huge, right? That is absolutely huge.
That is really amazing, actually, if you rethink how information is being documented. About 8 years ago, when we had the surge of scribes, I used to joke that we're the only industry that has brought back an extinct profession. It's gotten to a point where ambient listening can capture data and then repackage it depending on the use case. Like you mentioned, it could be for a clinical note, for billing, and so forth. Now that's a lot of data, right? If you think about all the ambient information, what do you think has to happen for systems not to be overwhelmed of how to process this information, right? If you think about, you have an ocean of choices now. How does a system, a hospital, a team make a decision about where to go? Is there going to be consolidation, packaging? What are your thoughts on this?
So specifically, say within the generative AI space, it's a number of companies that already control it. Epic is coming out with their own. Microsoft and Amazon Medical Scribe can be built into the back end of things. And so we're really seeing it's going to be consolidated across Microsoft, which owns Nuance, maybe 4 other companies, but they're going to lock it up. And so once those kinds of companies have all of that data, they're going to work much harder on things like predictive analytics. And so while it seems like there's so much more data, in fact, the doctor and the patients and anyone else on the healthcare team only has to read things like summaries. And so, for instance, if you've got, say, like a digital therapeutic and it's monitoring someone's mental health, on the front page of, say, a 47-page document, it will give the actual summary. But then if the doctor wants to look into the exact data, they can say, okay, I want to see what happened on March 27th because it looks like your coughing went out of control. They can flip to the page that has the cough data on that particular day and dive into it. Right. And so while there's a lot more data, it's going to be a lot easier to essentially understand. And you're not going to have to spend 10 minutes before seeing a patient studying their chart to find the relevant things. That's what the generative AI is going to be doing for the physician.
Really interesting. Can you share some thoughts as I think about this future? It's really exciting. But I can also see some concerns regarding trust and validity. So how is the ecosystem going to embrace developing a process where there's transparency, there's trust behind intentions, and validation of these tools and algorithms? David, can you give me some insights about what's happening?
So there is a lot going on. Thinking about the trust factor. So I get my primary care at One Medical, and I have been there about 8 years at this point. And so I do most of my shopping on Amazon or Whole Foods. And then I have all of my medical data from all of my specialists sent to One Medical, which means all of a sudden overnight last year when they purchased One Medical for $3.9 billion, Amazon now knows much more about me than I know about myself. And we already are on board with trusting companies like Amazon, or else we wouldn't be using them on a daily basis. And so a lot of the trust is going to come from maybe some of these consumer-facing companies. Thinking about companies like Best Buy. Best Buy, the consumer electronics giant, is actually now a hospital provider. They're the ones who go in with their geek squad and they go and they set up remote monitoring and they set up the hospital at home and then they manage it. Right. And so these are companies that we already inherently trust.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there has to be, there's some level of, coherence that companies have to maintain behind their values. And, where is the FDA fit in this? Can you just comment on, for those who are in the audience who may not understand software as a medical device, can you talk about some examples there and where the FDA fits in there and what are some of the kind of regulatory kind of things coming down the pipeline?
Sure. So over 700 companies or software programs have cleared the FDA that are AI-based. 75% of them are in radiology, right? Because obviously imaging analysis is what AI is best at. But then looking at companies like Prenuvo. So Prenuvo is direct to consumer, full body and full head MRI. And I've gotten mine done. It's $2,600. So it's definitely out of reach for a lot of people. But for those who can go do it, you can get a full body and head MRI. And what they're doing is they're checking for over 500 conditions, including early stage cancer in the pancreas or lung cancer, things like brain aneurysms. But the cool thing about them is they built their own AI tools behind the scenes, and those do not need to go through the FDA. because they are not selling them. You have to think of the FDA almost as a marketing agency. They are telling you how you are allowed to describe your particular solution, whether that's an AI-based software program or a medical device, right? And so with Prenuvo, they have AI that automatically numbers all the vertebrae and automatically metricizes each individual organ, as well as visceral fat. Right, and so for I'm planning on getting it, say, every 2 years, and that means I have that longitudinal data, over a 2-year period or even a 10-year period. But you can see,
data over time, and being able to process that will be the next kind of wave. One thing you just mentioned was regarding costs, right? Some things are going to be driving and shifting. What do you think has to happen in order to ensure equity and access, so we don't get the same disparities we've seen in other parts of healthcare occur in regard to the digital space, both within the US context, but as well as globally?
Sure. So I don't ever really use the word equity because we're just not going to all have equal access to things. It's just not possible. But we can democratize stuff so you have the ability to access. And so specifically in the US, around the Medicare population, they are really driving the value-based healthcare. And so all of a sudden, bringing value-based healthcare into the home solves for one of the biggest reasons people cannot access healthcare, and that is location, right? Once you solve for location, problems like, is the patient mobile? Do they have transportation? Do they need to hire, childcare? Do they need to take time off of work? Can they afford to take time off of work, right? All of those types of problems completely melt away when you solve for location, bring it into the patient's home, or say like a nearby community center or YMCA. Now, these new AI-based software programs around vocal biomarkers and around digital therapeutics means patients are able to interact and record some of their healthcare on a daily basis. And a lot of these things are free for the patient, right? And so all of a sudden they've gone from trying to access a doctor once a year to utilizing an app that really follows their progress and interacts with them in a natural way. And they'll have, healthcare at that point.
Really interesting. Do you think this is going to undermine the fabric of society from a standpoint of undermine the relationships that people have today with healthcare providers? Just similar, if you could argue, some people argue regarding like Amazon, how it kind of undermined local shops and those relationships. Do you think this is going to happen in the healthcare context where you'll shop around, you'll go to CVS or Walgreens and
Absolutely. You blanked out a little bit right there, but so what was the very end of the question?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
The question was, do you think it's going to undermine the doctor-patient relationship that people have had? I mean, personally,
Yes.
I had a primary care physician for 10 years, and over the past 6 years, I've had 4, right? So I'm just curious, what is your prediction regarding the future, regarding the human relationships in the healthcare system?
So they are going to dramatically shift because our expectations are shifting. And so taking like CVS for an example, I got 2 new medications, and my doctor sent them in, and one went to CVS, the retail store, and one went to CVS Caremark, which I work in healthcare, so I understand the difference between those two, but most patients don't. And it was absolutely a terrible experience. They mailed me my medication that got here 10 days later. I could only interact with them by calling them on the phone, right? And I had no idea it was coming in the mail. And all of a sudden, the $90 copay landed in my lap, right? And all of a sudden, I really lost trust in CVS because they didn't tell me anything. They didn't communicate. It was difficult to do. And so when it came time to renew it, I just called my doctor, I emailed my doctor, and I asked her just to send my prescriptions into Amazon Pharmacy. It was a game changer. I cannot imagine going back to CVS now that I've experienced Amazon Pharmacy. And I only live 1 block away from a CVS, right? And so our expectations on how we interact with healthcare are dramatically changing. I expect that Amazon style treatment where they texted me when the pharmacist filled the order, and then they texted me again when it went out for delivery, right? And so we are changing our expectations based on some of these big tech companies who are controlling that front door of healthcare. And that in and of itself is going to change our relationships. And so we're going to start to see patients more and more dropping companies or dropping doctors who can't do easy online scheduling, right? Or easy online messaging. I have a doctor who works at a big health system. And when I tried to send them my MRI scans from Prenuvo, he said I had to bring in a CD, which he would then send to the Department of Radiology, who would then upload the actual scans. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Right? But then with One Medical, now owned by Amazon, I was able to upload the report and all of the image files right to my EMR, the same way my Gmail works.
Yeah, so you're saying experience is going to drive a lot of how patients stick to a system. And I think that's I think something really important for hospitals to think through, how technology can help enhance that experience for them. Now, you didn't talk about this, but you're a serial entrepreneur and you've been involved in thinking through how to push this envelope. And what are the 3-4 areas you think that entrepreneurs should be thinking about if they really want to change the trajectory of patient care? Where can they contribute and not get lost or crushed by the big players?
So there are definitely lots of opportunities. Think about working with the big payers versus essentially trying to compete against them, right? And GE came out with, I think it was a report last year, and they expect there's over $1 trillion worth of workplace efficiencies in the world of healthcare, right? Workflow and workplace efficiencies. And so if you're going to make something easier for a doctor or for a hospital to do, especially if it's a software thing that really helps the stuff behind the scenes, there is a huge opportunity for that. Absolutely huge. And then of course, niche things. So something like if one of the big guys like Amazon or something, they're trying to really wrap up primary care. Well, maybe you are the partner who's the specialist that they refer to or things like that, right? There are lots of ways to think about working with the giant payers and with the big tech companies versus directly competing against them. And Apple is a good one. So the Apple Watch now has a number of apps that are available by prescription only. And so you can start to be able to utilize things like their accelerometer and their gyroscope and their single lead EKG. And there are 3 companies that I'm aware of that have already cleared the FDA with Apple Watch apps that are available by prescription only that metricize Parkinson's involuntary body spasms and then matches it to medication dosing and time. So a doctor has deep data on both the side effects of the medication and how that Parkinson's patient is moving purely from tracking the Apple Watch.
Robert, I'm laughing because you said a word. You said efficiency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Efficiency comes with a lot of baggage. And it comes with a lot of baggage in the healthcare system because of a lack of trust in historical performance. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of nuance in healthcare. And there's been a lot of poor implementation of technology in the healthcare setting that has left a bad taste in a lot of clinical frontline workers. And so today, when administrators talking about, bringing in technology for efficiency, there's tension. And that impedes change management, that impedes adoption. There's an inherent mistrust behind the motivations. How do you see resolving this? What would you recommend for hospitals and for executives to do to kind of bring everyone on board with a unified vision so that we can implement and serve those suffering?
So I would think of, first and foremost, show them case studies, right? Show how a different hospital or health system use these similar type efficiencies and the outcome of that, right? Physicians and other healthcare professionals, they like data, right? You want some actual hardcore core data. Hey, if this program is saving physicians over an hour and a half every single day from, because they're auto transcribing and auto summarizing the EMR, that is a significant impact, right? And so show them the case studies. And at the beginning with things like generative AI, I mean, you're not even going to have to convince people because companies like Epic already are putting like native apps that are generative AI inside of Epic software. And so it's not even going to be a conversation. It just is going to pop up on your EMR and it's suddenly just going to get easier.
Yeah, no, that's been really interesting. The nuance Epic relationship and the ambient transcribing. That's a huge shift, right? That would have never occurred if ChatGPT didn't become a publicly available tool where it kind of changed the trajectory of understanding of the power of generative AI. Are there other use cases that you foresee that can be leveraged, especially for the international community?
Yeah, well, one specific that is to the US that you might like is a company called SAMA. And what they're doing is they are accelerating pre-authorizations. And there's a new rule that takes effect in 2026 that the big payers have to get pre-authorizations and answer them within 72 hours. So all of a sudden, you're going to see a process that used to take 1, 2, or 3 weeks accelerate down to a day or two, right? And that's a big deal. And you can utilize things like SAMA right now to streamline prior authorizations. Now, globally, especially in places like Europe and the Nordics, they are really moving towards value-based healthcare. And they're doing it pretty well as far as I've heard, right? And so globally, it's a whole different story, making that much more efficient because if you're going to do a bundled payment of, hey, this patient needs knee surgery and for everything they need to do, including physical therapy and post-operative meds or whatever, we're going to pay you $10,000 for this, right? And so you need to absolutely be very, very efficient because otherwise you're going to go over that $10,000 and then the hospital loses money versus makes money based on patient outcomes and not using or wasting time, right? Time is a big thing that gets wasted, especially with these highly trained healthcare professionals like surgeons, like you.
I think that's something that people oftentimes don't appreciate is how much latent resources are sitting there not being used, right? And this is mismatch between people who need care and the care being accessed. And when care is being delivered, it's somewhat chaotic because of scheduling and all these other factors, or there's one shortage in a staff member. And I'm very optimistic that a lot of these kind of supply chain management components and logistical components can be alleviated by empowering managers and administrators with the right tools, the right information, right insights. So I think that's going to dramatically change things. I was going to look at the questions. We're at about 33 minutes here. There's several questions here that the audience have asked. The first question is from Robert Reed. When you talk about sniffing passive audio, so ambient information, do you anticipate privacy concerns? And if so, how do you alleviate the concern? So, how are you going to navigate that, especially in the US context? How are companies navigating that?
Well, with that, I would ask, what have you done with your Amazon Alexa and your Google Home and your smartphone with the microphone that could be open at all times? We already have so many devices listening to us. Amazon Alexa hears everything I say in one room of my house, right? So that's already happening, and we've already given up privacy in that respect. And so with companies, say like Health, which is the one that counts coughs, it doesn't keep a huge amount of recordings on file. It'll keep a snippet of a recording on file to hear, the coughing and things like that. but immediately it will stop listening if it's decided that it's not detecting coughing. And so we can do it that way, but
yeah. There's a second part of that question, which is interesting. Also, with all the data capture, who owns this data? The patient, the provider, the payer. So that ties into something really interesting. As you started off, you had an experience of being a medical nomad going through the process, and now you've receiving care, and your total experience is actually valuable from a data standpoint. Is there going to be a future where AI is going to enable a data broker or enable patients to opt in for research, to facilitate pharma companies and clinical trials? Can you just comment on where you see things today and where things are going with it from a data ownership standpoint?
Yes. Well, I do want to remind people that from a data standpoint, any one individual patient is meaningless, right? It's when you're dealing with these things, you need 200 patients or 5,000 patients or 100,000 patients. And then when you put all of that data together, that is very usable data when you're talking about things like population health or predictive analytics and training, AI on, a lot of different types of data streams. But an individual, our data isn't really worth all that much. And so, yes, I can see a place for things like data brokers, whether it's for the individual or more likely for, say, entire companies and things like that. But secondly, it depends on where the data is flowing. And so once it gets to the patient, and I know my Apple phone, the Apple Health app will download all of the patient portal side of my EMRs to my smartphone. And so suddenly I now own all of that data, and it's outside of the need of HIPAA compliance at that point because the patient owns it. And so there's a lot going on with that. But I do say, it's not the individual that's worth anything, it's the collective that's worth things.
Yeah, and actually, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. About a decade ago, there was Google Health, and there was a movement to create a patient-owned medical record. Just to your comment where you said, I have the images on the CD and so forth. And the reality was patients did not want to sit there and plug in all their information into a separate record to then somehow share with their providers. Have you seen, or is there going to be a shift in creating a new type of patient-owned medical record that leverages generative AI that can summarize for your provider, your doctors, your story?
I am guessing that that's going to come out of one of the giants. And so the Apple Health app does that type of thing already. And Apple, if you think about them, they took a significant portion of the music industry profits for years by being that thin software layer, right? And that is how they are angling their Apple Health app and the Apple Watch, right? It's that nice buyer-seller marketplace that can interact. And so companies like Apple can make a lot of money by allowing their Apple Health app to be that buyer-seller marketplace.
Wow. I mean, if what you're saying turns out to be true, we're going to have very intimate relationships with these technology companies, right? They're going to.
We already do.
Yeah, but it's the ignorance of it, right? Most people, I think, don't recognize the amount of information we're sharing. But when it comes to healthcare needs, especially when it comes to the entire journey and the mental health, you talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's a lot to kind of assimilate there about an individual. And you can see people then being concerned regarding, with that amount of information, how you can be manipulated from an advertising standpoint and so forth, right? Do you see a third-party neutral organization forming that will be kind of the privacy ethical consortium, making sure companies are executing on what they say and being coherent with these values? Or how do you see this industry self-regulating? Is it be from a government standpoint? Is it going to be from within, or a combination?
So It's all around, I think, government. And so if you think about it right now, we don't have any privacy, right? Apple, Google, Amazon, they know more about me than I know about myself. The private payers, right? They have access to all of my medical records because I give them to them willingly by, submitting bills and claims. And so those giants already know more about every single one of us than we know about ourselves. But the reason they can use the data in certain ways is because of government regulation. Now, United Healthcare, right now I'm with Blue Shield of California. They probably even know, what day I'm gonna probably die and from what type of thing. I mean, they really know me through and through, but they have to insure me because of government regulation. And so we've already lost privacy. All our data is already out there. It's going to come down to how that data is going to be allowed to be used legally.
Well, it's going to be fascinating because, as you know, we don't have a one global government, and these tools and devices are coming from around the world, right? There's new devices, new software being developed in China, India, and Africa, and it'll be very interesting to see how we navigate as a society, as a global society, these big questions coming forth. I wanted to end on a couple of things. One is there's some exciting conferences coming up, and you're a frequent speaker, and I'd love to hear if there's any conferences you want to share and tell people that you'll be at. We will be at Vive in Los Angeles, and we'll be in North Carolina in February. Our team will post that up, and if anyone in the audience would like to connect with us to talk more about AI and technology in the healthcare context, especially in the hospital context, please reach out. You can email us at webinar and reveal HealthTech. And similarly, Robin, if people want to reach out and connect more and learn more about your book and what you're doing, where would they go?
So I am the only Robin Farmanfarmaian in the entire universe. So it's really easy to find me. Go ahead and find me on my website or on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. So with that, Robin, so as we come to a close, is there a final message or a piece of advice that you'd like to leave with our audience regarding the future of AI in healthcare?
I would just say it is an incredibly exciting time to be in healthcare, and it is an incredibly exciting time to be alive. I am just so incredibly grateful that I get to be a part of this, right, in the year 2024. And so really just appreciate the fact that we have better medical care now than kings did even 100 years ago. The wealthiest people on the planet had worse healthcare than the people who are getting the worst healthcare today. Right. And so it is just an incredible thing.
Well, Robin, I appreciate you. You've always been a force of hope and excitement. And I think everyone, in the coming future is a huge opportunity for everyone to be a change agent. And I think if we become united, we work together, we can really change the trajectory. So thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank anyone else on the calls. And with that, I'd like to end it. Thank you.